In this lesson, we're going to pick up where we left off in the last lesson, having talked about AJAX and JSON. Where we left off, we were dealing with loading JSON data through AJAX and then wanting to put it into our page. And what we had to do was go select each of the elements on the page and then write the content we had loaded into those elements. And while it worked, it was a little bit inconvenient. So this is not a problem that's unique to the web world. In fact, what you'll find is that one of the main things going on in JavaScript frameworks today is this whole idea of templating and being able to inject data into templates. So we're going to learn today another little library called Handlebars that allows us to create data templates and pass data into them. We'll also talk about another little library called Lodash that allows us to do more advanced work with arrays and objects and JSON data, basically. So let's dive in. As an overview, often in a single page application, we have data coming in and out of our system. We just had a little bit of an introduction to this in that last lesson, right? When data comes in, we often want to display it on the page. In order to do this, we need snippets of HTML into which we can inject the data that we've loaded. So Handlebars.js is a templating framework that allows us to prepare those HTML snippets that contain expressions for data values. These expressions are basically placeholders that will eventually be replaced by the data that we've loaded. So we can then inject JSON data into these snippets or into the expressions that are inside of these snippets that we've prepared. Handlebars.js includes dynamic templating features that include the ability to format our data, not just to stick it in as is, but also to format it using filters or what they call helpers. And also to do block-based processing such as loops for looping through our data sets and conditional data sets so that we can display certain things if one condition is true and alternative things if not. And it does a lot of other things that we won't cover in this course, but I wanted to give you an introduction. So there's a 4-step process, and step 3 has 2 different branches that we can pursue with it. So we'll get there and cover that as it comes up. First of all, we're going to want to prepare or load a data set. So we need to first have a set of data in mind. In other words, we want to have these properties in mind. So we're going to be working with a product, and we want it to have a name, a price, and a description. This is what we had in the exercise from last week, right? In the demo file, I should say. We can create this data in our script like we've shown here, but we're more likely in the long run to be loading this data using AJAX. We'll have more on this a little bit later in the presentation, but for now let's just imagine this data set is manually created. All right, so step 2 then, with that data in mind, is that we're going to prepare HTML template snippets. Either in the same HTML file or in a separate file, we can create a snippet that includes handlebars template variables and commands like this. So here you're seeing 3 different examples of how we can provide these handlebars expressions. So the default, most normal one is what you see with the name variable here. So the idea is there that inside of those double curly braces, or double braces, we're going to be injecting the name property from the product we loaded. Remember that product had a name, a price, and a description. Okay, so those double curly braces are kind of the normal situation. All right, so most of the time we'll be using those. So the name here is a standard expression awaiting the value with that name. That is the name of name. That's a little confusing. Trouble with having properties named name. The next example on the next line down, you can see also uses the double curly braces, but this time we're making use of a helper. The helper is what we place first. It's called dollars. And the price is the value that we see second there, separated by a space. So the idea is we're going to be putting the price value in there, but first it's going to be passed through that dollars helper. And then the third example here is a triple curly brace, which is what we use when we want to have actual HTML content injected. Same idea between the H2 line there with the double curly braces and the div line with the triple curly braces. It's the same idea as what we do with jQuery, where we go .text for plain text, that would be that H2 line, or .html for HTML text, that would be the div line, the 3 curly braces. So we just have to keep that in mind, that if we want to inject actual HTML content, we need to use that triple curly brace because we want it to be an escaped expression. All right, so now for the part where there's two different options. So I'm showing you, they actually both have the same steps, step 1 and 2. So in your notes you'll see the heading 3, precompile the template, and then these 2 steps underneath it. But in your notes you have 2 columns, and you're seeing one of those columns here where it's option 3A. So in this option we're going to be, let's overview the steps first. Step number 1, or sub-step number 1 here, is that we're going to either select or load the HTML templates. So the select situation is what we're showing here on this page. We're pursuing that select branch. Then the second step here is that we're going to be using handlebars.compile to precompile or analyze that snippet. Essentially, we're going to load that snippet in, and Handlebars is going to look through it for these expressions that we've been talking about and prepare them to be to have data injected. All right. So in this case, step number 1 is over on the left, and it's just going to be the top section in your left-hand column on your slide on your note sheet, where we have created this snippet inside of a script tag in our same document. Okay, notice that it has an ID of product-TPL, and inside of this script tag is just the div and its inner content that we saw on the last slide, where we were the idea of preparing the template. Then the sub-step 2 is shown over here on the right on this slide, and then just in the lower portion on the left-hand side of your note sheet, where we load the script tag content with jQuery. So there we're declaring source. It's going to be assigned a jQuery selector for the ID product TPL, and we're going to get its inner HTML content. So you can imagine what we're doing there is selecting the script tag that has an ID of product TPL. See that over on the left there? And we're loading its HTML content and storing that in source. Okay, that source now is something that we can pass into handlebars.compile, and the result we store in template. So we've selected the content from our page, and we have precompiled it by passing it into handlebars.compile. Okay, all along we've used variables to store the outcome of each of those 2 different steps. Okay, let's look at the other option for big step 3 here. This is investigating the load portion of that step 1 there. In this case, we're placing our handlebars template in a separate file. So notice we don't have the script tag wrapping around it. We've just placed this in a separate file, such as in a templates folder in a file called product.tpl.html. So there it's just that div with the handlebars expressions inside of it. Then in our script file, so back in maybe our main page in a script section or in our scripts.js, we're going to load that template when needed using AJAX. So you can see we're using AJAX, the get operation, to go to that templates/product.tpl.html file. And when that's loaded, we'll call this anonymous function where we pass in the data that was loaded and use that data to precompile using handlebars.compile. Okay, so let's look at those. We're going to look at one more step, and then we'll investigate each of these. We'll kind of review them all in one flow. So the very last step here is that we need to actually inject the data into the template. So we had imagined the data in step 1. We had then set up our snippet in step 2. In step 3, we deal with precompiling that template, either because we've placed it in the file in a script tag and we've selected it, precompiled it, or because we've placed it in an external file and loaded that using AJAX and then precompiled it. And now step 4, remember we have that data stored in product. We can now inject product into the template that we had prepared. So we're going to use the data objects that we've loaded or whatnot to populate the handlebars expressions set up in the snippets. Okay, so that's the 4 steps elaborated. Let's look at an example of it all in one flow. So here is the script that we would need if we had placed our template in a script tag in the same document. So this is the full process for the select set. We have that data prepared. We load the template content, store it in source. Then we pass source into handlebars compile and store that in template. And then we inject the data by calling template with parens and passing our data from way at the beginning there. The green code is being passed into the template, and we store the result in HTML. All right, so that's the process for the load side. Let's look at the, or sorry, for the select side. Let's look at the load side. In this case, we've got our data, we've got the properties there, and then in this case, we're going to go and load in that separate template file using AJAX. The result in this case, we've stored in a variable called source, and then we pass source into handlebars.compile. The result is stored in template. And then we use template to inject the data product and store that in HTML. All right, so those are the steps. Last of all, we'd probably want to do something with that HTML snippet, like put it onto the page. So let's just kind of come back to this idea of manually creating the data versus kind of retrieving it from some other file. So injecting data into a template can involve loading 2 separate files. The template, which we've talked about already, as well as the actual JSON data itself. So rather than hard coding that data into our file, we might first load that using one AJAX operation, and then after that has loaded, then load the template using a second AJAX operation. And then we can continue on to compile the template and inject the data. So here you can see I've used the same colors as on the previous slides, where green represents kind of the data set. The yellow or orangey yellow represents the loading the template, and then the kind of or the template file itself, and then the light blue there is the precompiled template that we're then injecting the data into. So this little nested situation is considered a chained AJAX series, where the data is first loaded, then the template is loaded, and finally the data is injected into it. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about JSON, just to be sure we've covered this. Oh, you know what? Actually, let's go work these examples, because this is worth trying out before we move on too far. So let's step back to this idea of creating our templates. So remember, we've got these several different options for how we put these placeholders or handlebars expressions into our data. And the base operation there is just the double curly braces. We only need the triple curly braces when we have HTML data coming in. And we only need that little filtered expression when we actually have a helper. So we're going to work with those now. So in the demo file that I've prepared for you, the first thing we want to think about is the data set that we're working with. So we can look at our products. Product A, remember, has a name, a price, and a description, and that structure is the same for B and C. Okay, we'll talk about the all products in a little bit later here, but let's say that we wanted to format our little template snippet here as a handlebar snippet. So the first thing is we're not going to want to keep it right here. We're going to want to move it into, say, a script tag, like we had demonstrated before. So we'll do script, and we'll give it an ID of product template. We'll paste our data in here, and we also had that, where was it, just to make sure I get it right. There it is. Type of text is x-handlebars-template. Okay, so there we have our markup, but now we need to actually put our placeholders in. So right here is where we would want the name property to go. So inside of double curly braces we can place name, and then our goal would be that the name property is going to be injected in right there. Then right in here is where we would put the price. So let's leave the $sign there, but put our double curly braces expression in and place price there. And finally, inside of this div is where we want the description property to go. So there we are with double curly braces, but oh, wait a minute, this is actually likely to contain some HTML content. So we need the triple curly brace to make sure this is an escaped expression. Okay, so there is our option where we've got this directly in our file inside of this script tag. And so let's give it a whirl. We're first going to want to load our data. So this is where we're going to do an AJAX operation, $.get. We're going to pass in the path to the data set and then have an anonymous function that responds to it. And we'll call the result data. Okay, so where is that file? Well, it's in data subproduct-a.json. Okay, now in here, we're going to select the script tag that we have here and get its inner HTML and store it in the variable source. You know what? I should probably match the variables I've put in my instructions here. Yeah, okay. So let's use product as the name here so that we can see that the data we're loading is actually going to be a product. Okay, so then source is going to be where we're going to select the thing on the page and get its HTML content. What thing is it? Well, it's this script tag. So the thing with an ID of product TPL. Okay, so that goes in here like we've been doing all along with selectors. Okay, so with that loaded, now we can say we're going to want to precompile. So we're going to say now template is assigned handlebars.compile, and we're going to pass our source into that. Now, I should pause right here and point out that we don't actually have the handlebars library added to our document right now. So we have the AJAX library, the jQuery library, but we're going to want to get that handlebars library. So just like we might have done for jQuery, we can search for Google hosted libraries, and we can see if handlebars is one of those. If it's not, then there's a small change we can make to our search query to make that more easy to find. Okay, so I don't see handlebars here. That's no problem. So instead, we're going to search for handlebars CDN. You could look up Handlebars.js directly, and you'll probably find the main Handlebars website that's where it's documented, all the different features. But a site like this is basically what we've been doing with the Google hosted libraries, but it's just another form of doing this. So we want to be careful to get the right one. You're going to want to be careful that the file that you load is just a standard .js. You don't want this .amd or amd-min runtime, any of those. But you could use the handlebars.min. When in doubt, just go for the one that looks the simplest, like this one here. So we're going to copy that, and then we're going to need to just create a little script tag like we did up there and paste that in. Okay, so we've loaded our JSON data file that was outside. We've selected the template that we have at this point manually placed inside of our document, and then we've compiled or precompiled that template. Last of all, we can say HTML is the template with the product data injected into it. So let's console.log HTML and see the results. Before I do that, let me just explain quickly why we took this template and put it inside of a script tag. As it was right here in the document, and that meant that we'll see it when we load the page. by putting it into a script tag that basically hides it. So it's not going to be visible on the front end when we load this page, nor is it going to be visible for a second and then disappear and then reload with the actual stuff. It's going to be hidden until we're ready to place it in the page in some fashion. Okay, so let's go back over here and refresh. So you see it's not there. We've pulled it out of our page. And it looks like we have, oops, did you notice that? I had not included all 3 closing braces. Okay, so that was the error there. Okay, good. So ignore the fave icon error if you haven't learned to do that already. So this is the result that we're logging, and notice how product A, $10, and our actual markup is correctly injected into our template. And you can see the difference if I come over here and log the source. So this would be that raw source template without the data injected. Okay, so you see there it has the handlebars expressions, and now this is the version with the data injected, and it's all ready to go. Good, so we now have in this HTML content, or in this HTML variable, the content that we do actually want to put onto our page. So all we need to do now is figure out where we want it to go and use good old jQuery to insert it. So for example, here is we have this container and we want it to go at the end inside of that container. So that would be the append operation. So we can select the thing with an ID of row, in this case, and append our HTML formatted template. And there you go. Pretty nifty, eh? Let's change the data source, and we'll see a different data set. Woohoo! Okay, so there we've shown you the operation where we've at least loaded an external data file, but we still had our template hard-coded inside of our existing file. But a practice is to actually take little data or template snippets like this, and rather than put them in these kind of weird script tags, actually put them in separate files, such as in a templates folder like this. So we would create a new file, and we might call it product. And the convention I've seen used is to give it the extension .tpl.html. HTML is the actual extension, but saying .tpl is a way of kind of calling our attention that, hey, this is not a full HTML file, it's sort of a template snippet. There's nothing magical about that, it's just a convention. So product TPL HTML, and now we have that little template file there that we can then paste our snippet into. Just get it cleaned up a little bit. Okay, so now we no longer have the snippet here in our file, and so this right here will not work anymore. Instead of this, we need to do another AJAX operation where we load that little external file that we just created. So we're going to do another AJAX operation where we're going to call a file, and then when it's returned, we're going to have a function, and then all of this stuff needs to move inside of that. Okay, so this is what you saw modeled in the slides, where we have these chained AJAX operations. We're going to let this be the source. So source is going to be what we're loading, then we compile it, then we create the template, then we inject it into the template, and then we pass it into the page. So all that's left is to name the path to the template file. So notice we had loaded product B as our data, and then when that has finished loaded, we have that stored in product. Now we're going to go get our template, which is going to be templates/products or product.tpl.html. Okay, so when that comes back, it's going to be stored in source. So we can precompile the source, inject the data into the source, and then append that same bit of content. So we should see the same result here when we refresh. We've just made it a little bit cleaner by taking that template and putting it in an external file. And once again, we could change the data set and see a different set of data. Okay. So there you have a basic example. Of course, we could do the same kind of thing as we did in the last activity, where we wait until to load this data until we've clicked on one of these products and then pass the appropriate product in. So right here is where we would pass in the correct product name to get the right JSON data set. Okay, but there's a few more things to teach you, perhaps to do this a little bit more efficiently. So back to the slides. So we were just starting to talk about more JSON, and this is just to remind you that JSON can contain a variety of data formats, including strings, numbers, booleans, objects, and arrays. We talked about this briefly in the last lesson, but I wanted to remind you of it here. We can use all of these to our benefit when using our templating, and often we'll package data as a collection. A collection is an array that contains objects as its items. So remember that an array is a list or a set of items. Just imagine that each of those items is an object. I think we've seen this a couple times in the course, but here's a reminder of what this could look like in JSON. So the root object here has one property called books. Books contains an array. It actually contains a collection because what's stored in that array are two items that are formatted as objects. These objects have the property ID, title, author, and year published. Ring a bell? So we'll use this idea of collections moving forward when we're talking about a set of data, a list of items, so an array, but each of those items is an object that has its own kind of properties. All right, so keep that in mind that we're going to be working with collections. That said, here are a couple more things about Handlebars. So we've looked at the kind of basic expressions in Handlebars, how we insert plain values, how we do the escaped values with the triple curly braces. We also showed you how you would insert an expression for a helper, and that's one of the things we'll look at on the next slide. But note that you can do conditional statements like this, where you do a double curly brace and then pound if, and then a Boolean expression, or a Boolean expression that would be replaced in place of the condition variable that's there. And of course, we can also then have an else clause, and we mark the end of that block with a double braces / if. Similar to that, we have loops. Now, loops are going to assume that we're working with a collection. So we're going to do a double curly brace, pound each, and then provide the array property that we want to loop through. And then inside of this, we can basically just assume that we're inside of that array working on one of those items that has properties like ID, name, price that we looked at on that last slide. And then we just close the each loop with double braces / each. So let's go take a look at how we might do that. So first of all, let's talk about the conditional phrase. And in order to do that, let's consider our data set and add a Boolean property. So something like, is the product in stock? And we can say, this product is in stock. So we'll set it to true. Then we need to make sure our data is consistent here. So in product B, let's make product B to be not in stock. And just to be consistent, let's go ahead and do the same thing in C. And let's make this one be true in stock. Now I realize I've added each of these as a new property, so I need to make sure that I go back up to that previous property and put a comma at the end of the line. So you'll want to make sure to catch that if you did the same thing I did and just put it in. There we go. Okay, and we'll fix the all products later when we need to. Okay, so now our template can change in that now we can use a Boolean, a conditional statement. So double braces if, and then we're going to say if in stock. and then we're going to close our if. Okay, so if it's in stock, we're going to say product is in stock. Okay, so let's test that. Here we have product C. Remember that product C was in stock, so we see our message. If we change our file here to load product B, we should not see that message. Okay, so if we wanted to provide an alternative message instead, we could go to our template, and in between here we could say else and say product is not in stock. And we could put a little class of alert. Okay. So there you go. We've got product is not in stock. If we switch to product A, which is in stock, the message changes. Okay, so conditional variables in play here in our code. The other thing we talked about was each loops. And so here's a situation with the each loop. Let's imagine that rather than just showing one product, we wanted to show all of the products. So we would essentially say for each of our products, we want to show this whole little set here. So we might want to say for each products, show this whole set, and then end the loop here. Okay, see how that works? The idea would be we would repeat all of this stuff inside of here. So maybe this becomes a UL, and maybe inside of our loop we have a list item because we're showing a list of products. Okay, see the structure there? For each products. Okay, so now we're going to need to change up our data set because we're going to want to actually load data that contains a true collection, which we have prepared here in all products. But we do need to make the quick little change of adding the in stock property. So I'm just going to copy and paste that. Okay, and I want the first and the last to be in stock. Okay, so you can see we have the root object has a products property, and that products is an array. So we can loop through an array. So now our template should be expecting that file. Therefore, we need to change which file we're loading here to be the all products. All right, so this is where the magic really begins to happen because now we no longer need to create all three of these manually in our HTML. We can instead use the power of templating and our data set. So it's not so bad when you have 3 products, but imagine that you had 500 products. Oh man, would you want to go in and manually populate all those? Why no, sir, I would not want to do that. Instead, I would like to use a templating system and some automation such as a loop. There you go. Okay, so we've looked at the each loop, we've looked at the conditional statements. Now we need to talk about that last little piece, and that is how we do those filtered expressions, aka helpers, and handlebars helpers. Not hamburger helpers, but handlebars helpers. So these are custom filters for our data, and we use this pattern. We're going to call handlebars.registerHelper, and this is going to take a name for the helper, then an anonymous function that we pass a value into. In placeholder 2, we're going to do some code that modifies or formats value, and then we return the modified version of value. Okay, so let's do that for something that you've been doing quite frequently in this course, and that is to ensure that a number that you have that you want to appear as a price is formatted to have, you know, a 2 decimal places, right? So let's say that we're going to format this price value as dollars and always ensure that it has the 2 decimal places. Because perhaps our values are going to come in without those formatting, like something like this, where we have a whole integer here, and only one decimal place here. And oh, that one happens to come in as a double decimal. So that's what we're going to do with a helper is, provide a little filter that ensures that whatever comes in here as price is converted to a number and output with 2 decimal places. So in our script down here, what we're going to do is say handlebars.register helper. We're going to call it dollars, and we're going to pass in an anonymous function, or provide an anonymous function that allows us to pass in the value. We're going to return value. So here we're going to reassign value to be the number form of value, 2 fixed, 2 decimal places. So that's going to ensure that whatever value we have, and I'll prove the point a little bit more by making this one actually be a string. So it's coming with the right decimals, but it's coming in as a string. How do we deal with that? Okay, so we've prepared our helper called dollars. We've instructed our template to pass the price value through the dollars helper, and we'll get the updated value of our variable there then. And you can see it's done the job very well. All right. So carrying on then, that's handlebars. And so there's lots to experiment with, lots to get used to there for sure, particularly the chained AJAX requests. But I think if you follow the formula and you understand the pieces that are coming together, with some practice, you'll be just fine. So let's move on to talk about Lodash, particularly as we now get into working with collections. Remember, arrays that contain objects inside of them. We might need to be able to do a little bit more with those. So both vanilla JavaScript and jQuery provide some operations for working with arrays and objects. But when we begin to work with complex objects and a more advanced set of needs arise. Lodash.js is a library of functions we can use for more high-powered processing with lists or collections like this, where jQuery uses the $sign as kind of its universal variable or symbol. Lodash uses the underscore or the Lodash. Now you see where they got the name. Okay, so Lodash.find is one method that we'll introduce here, and we'll cover some others when we need them later. This allows us to search inside a collection for values of those inner objects. So we're going to kind of search for a particular item within a subset or a particular set of items within that collection. So we're going to call Lodash.find, and we're going to pass in first the collection in which to search, followed by a comma and a space, and then the filter or search criterion, such as an object snippet like this. So imagine we have a collection of colors, and we want to search for the one whose color is red. Okay, we would pass that whole object in for placeholder 2. So let's imagine that we've got a much better situation here where rather than loading each individual file, what we want to actually do is retrieve or load this one file that returns us the whole data set, but then we really want to filter and pull out just the one product. Okay, so how would we do that? Well, first of all, let's give ourselves a different template where we just have one item. So I'm going to go products.tpl.html. So the idea here is I have a singular product template and I have a plural products template. So I want my products template to be the one that's ready to receive all products and loop through them. And I'll use my singular product template to contain just a single product item. So this is actually the markup that we want in the plural version. And then we'll make sure that this one goes back to just the single product. So we don't want the loop or the li anymore. All right. There we go. And now I'm going to change that ID here to be the plural form products. All right, so we're going to kind of revert back to calling, okay, no, actually we're still going to load all the products. But yes, we're now still loading a single individual product. But before we do, what we're going to want to do is filter down to one of our products using Lodash.find. So like with the Handlebars library, Lodash is also going to be a library we're going to want to load. So let's search for Lodash CDN again, like we did for Handlebars. And again, we want to look for the simplest one here, like this. And we're going to have another script tag. There we go. Okay, so we've got Lodash loaded in now as well. So up here we're going to say Lodash.find. We're going to pass in the collection, which is products. And we're going to find, say, a particular one of those by its ID. So where ID equals product 1. Now, did we have IDs on our products? I don't recall. I don't think I did. Nope. So let's add those. So A here, B here, C here. Okay, so product A. So what we're saying is look inside of the products collection for the product whose ID is product-A. Okay, so now we're going to need to store that in the variable product. Okay, so this variable is the one that we already had in place down here. We've just received all the products in a variable called products. We've then filtered that down to one product, stored that in product, and now we can inject product into our single product template file and insert that into our document. So let's take a look. Probably have a little error somewhere. Of course, I forgot the commas after my ID properties. But remember that what we get when we load products, you'll see if I log it here, is we get an object. That object has a property called products, and it's that property that contains the collection. See, products has the collection that has the items in it. So it's going to feel a little bit weird, but what we actually need to do is go products.products. Essentially, we're going inside of the data that we got back. Maybe this will make a little bit more sense if we change this to be data. So the data that we loaded dot products. So the products property inside of our data, and we're going to find product A. And what else did I do? Oh, yeah, can't console log products because it doesn't exist. Okay, there we go, and there's product A. Okay, show you the idea. If we change this to product B, we get product B. We change this to product D, there's no project D. Problem, nothing to show. Okay, so, but C should work. Okay, so now we have a little simpler of something to work in, where we could say instead, hey, what about we listen for a data, a click, and we say pass in this, ID property here into there to get the appropriate product. So we have all kinds of things that we can do from there. So there's a little bit of Handlebars, there's a little bit of Lodash for you, and now you're ready to try out the exercise for this week. Good luck.